well, in my case and in his, for all of our adult lives, because we deeply believe it. So yes, there will be disappointment, but also a determination to move on from this. You're absolutely right. We have come much closer than anybody, apart from ourselves perhaps, said that we were able to do just a few months ago. And that is because we've made a compelling case, and many people have responded to that. And some of those who didn't vote yes will have voted no because they believe that vote would deliver more power. So I said earlier on, and I absolutely hold to this, Scotland has changed forever. There's no going back to the time before this referendum and just having business as usual. The status quo has not got any kind of endorsement or mandate tonight, and politicians have to absolutely understand that.
Mr Cameron will be saying something later, we understand, Nicola. Can we expect Mr Salmond to be saying something too?
I'm sure you can, yes.
I think we'd... Nick, do you want one more?
I've just got a final word. I think there'll be people watching this programme whose mood may be one of despair. We've seen the excitement that there was on the streets. I just wonder what your message is to people who are not professional politicians like you, who place their hopes in this and may really feel despair tonight at what's happened.
Well, people will be disappointed, and I'm not going to stand here at this point, when dawn is not even, I don't know if dawn's broken yet, it probably has, and tell people just to brush aside their disappointment. This has been a campaign that people, I have to say on both sides, have invested a lot of emotion and time and effort and commitment to, and people of course are going to take time to get over the disappointment of that, but we should not lose sight of what has happened in Scotland over the past few weeks. This campaign has been the best thing I've ever been involved in my life, and I say that now when it looks as if we might not get the yes vote that I was hoping for. I say that as strongly now as I would have said it to you this time yesterday. So we need to pick ourselves up and move on. That appetite for change, that demand for change is there, and we've got a responsibility to make sure that demand is met.
Nicola, you've been very generous with your time. It's 28 minutes past 5. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll no doubt speak later on today. Thanks very much. Nicola Sturgeon there, and well, there were lots of messages in there, Nick, didn't you think? And
yeah,
Sarah too?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I thought it was fascinating, really, that she is signalling, I think, that when we hear from Alex Salmond, of course, again, we'll hear just what we heard from her, which is that great disappointment that she expressed, but a total determination that there's million and more votes that's been got, that a sum total for the no campaign of the high 40%. Let's remember that's 15% above where traditionally independence was always regarded as on about a third in this country for about 2 or 3 decades. It's clear to me that the leadership of the SNP, the leadership of the Scottish Government will now say, we have a mandate for change, we have a mandate to be consulted, to be persuaded, to be convinced of the powers that the Unionist Party in Westminster are coming up with. And if it's not good enough, we will have a mandate to argue, to fight, to get a better deal.
Sarah?
We are going to hear from Alex Salmond at 10 o'clock in the morning from his official residence in Edinburgh, and I think Rick's right, we'll hear very similar messages we heard from Nicola Sturgeon there, who did not say she was going to take part in a process to determine what these powers are going to be. The 3 main parties don't agree on them. They've talked about a conversation within Civic Scotland to come up with some kind of agreement. It was not clear from what Nicola Sturgeon said there that the SNP were going to be a part of that conversation. They may well take a view on whether or not it's good enough and say that they have a large mandate to try and force their hand, but it wasn't clear they were going to actually cooperate.
Just to look at the forecast, because we mentioned the forecast earlier, the forecast is for a no, and Nicola Sturgeon acknowledging the strength of that forecast. But let's have a look at the predicted share, and there you have the margin which is attached to that prediction now. 55% a no, 45% yes, and that's the kind of margin that we are looking at, and it's difficult to see that moving a lot now, given what's still to come. A quick word from Hardip and Michael, and then we'll have a news summary. Hardip?
We need to make sure we don't get carried away with the hyperbole of what is a binary vote. People are much closer than the yes-no suggests. There were a lot of people that would have sat and looked at a blank ballot paper and made up their mind there and then. In the main, we on the yes side, in the main, believe that the no folks wanted what was best in their eyes for Scotland, as we wanted what was best for Scotland. There are peripheries and edges of muppets, as we call them up here, that no one will be able to communicate with and talk to. But for the main part, we share a vision for a better Scotland. The outcome may be different. People talk about healing divisions and rifts in Scotland. Scotland's been divided along these fault lines pretty much for all of my life and long before that, because apparently there was a world before I was around. I'm upset to think there was too. But these rifts have always been there. This is not insurmountable by any means. Actually, there's a brilliant opportunity with a genuine mandate. It's not the result I wanted, but it's a mandate. The people have spoken. We must listen.
The mandate.
Yeah, I agree that Scotland has changed. It is inconceivable that we would sit and just tolerate the status quo. So all of the UK party leaders and the First Minister of Scotland have got to respond tomorrow in a way that signals to all the people who voted, this amazing exercise in democracy, amazing, staggering turnout, that hope, that energy is not put away and expected to be ignored.
Okay.
So, Michael,
yeah.
you're a senior Liberal Democrat in Scotland, former Secretary of State. Presumably you were part of it when the three UK party leaders came together and decided to sign that vow in which they pledged there would be more powers. What conversations have there been about trying to find some common agreement between your three really quite different offers of more devolution?
These are, I believe, my judgment, still in relatively early stages. However, tonight's results turbocharges that debate. For the Prime Minister tomorrow, any of the other UK leaders or the Scottish party leaders to try and slough it off and say, right, business as usual, would sow the seeds of a result which in a few years' time would reverse tonight.
You've had 2 years, and it's in the early stages.
No.
You've had 2 years to give us something.
Hang on.
Something. You rushed in at the last minute with some mandate written on the back of a fag packet. That's what you've done. That's what the Scottish people are worth.
No, that's unfair.
Give me one policy.
Uncharacteristically unfair.
Give me one policy.
On
one policy.
On
That's what you
income
need to give me.
tax,
that you've all agreed on.
On job centres and work programmes, on housing benefit, those three things across the parties, there's consistency there. And I think we should see more effort put into resolving some of the differences at the edges.
Let's
We've
pause.
got to do it.
Let's pause. We'll have more talk to come because we still have 6 results to come to. 26 results in, 6 declarations to come. It's time for a summary of the news.
Levitt Machinery WHL Hockey is live on Shaw. Catch the NHL stars of tomorrow today. Don't miss the excitement when the Kamloops Blazers and Victoria Royals tangle in the BC capital as we drop the puck on the new season. Tune in Saturday, September 27th, 7 Pacific, 8 Mountain for great junior hockey action.
Hi, I'm Don Taylor here at Levitt Machinery, inviting you to watch Levitt Machinery's WHL on Shaw.
Expensive bush.
I'm sorry, I felt inspiration.
I'm about to rip it out of the ground. Ah!
Use the hips. It'll come easier.
Come on!
There it is.
Just stop doing this stupid stuff.
Why are you dressing up like Robert De Niro?
Are you talking to me? I get what you're doing.
I'm watching you. I'm watching you, fucker.
If you want some, come get some.
Break down the ice, man. It's not a good thing.
Hang on.
Living off the land, that's my passion. This is who I am.
Pornography, are we in?
Being a dictator is like being a doctor. You're always on call.
This fall, all new series, all new seasons of your favorite shows. This is history now.
Hello, you're with BBC World News. I'm Sally Bundock with our special coverage of the Scottish referendum. Shortly, I'll be handing back to our colleagues who are in Glasgow as we continue to monitor the results as they come in. But before I do so, let's update you on some of the other key stories this hour. In the United States, a grandfather has shot dead his 6 young grandchildren and his adult daughter. He then killed himself. The incident took place in the small town of Bell, about 30 miles west of Gainesville in North Florida. The children ranged in age from 3 months to 10 years old. Police identify the grandfather as Don Spirit, who is 51. They say he had a criminal history.
First deputy on scene made contact with the subject, who later committed suicide. Deputies searched the residence, which revealed multiple victims with apparent gunshot wounds inside the residence.
The US Senate has approved President Obama's plan to arm and train moderate Syrian rebels to fight the jihadists of the group Islamic State. It's part of Washington's campaign to fight the group, which has taken control of a swathe of territory across Syria and Iraq. President Obama said it was vital the United States sent a firm message to the world.
The strong bipartisan support in Congress for this new training effort shows the world that Americans are united in confronting the threat from ISIL, which has slaughtered so many innocent civilians.
The giant Chinese online retailer Alibaba has priced its shares at $68 as it prepares to begin trading on the New York Stock Exchange later on Friday. Alibaba operates a number of online markets in China and elsewhere and handles more transactions than Amazon and eBay put together. The share offer is one of the biggest in US history. Those are the latest stories. Now let's hand you back to our team with their coverage of the Scottish referendum in Glasgow.
So far, onto our headquarters here, and so far the yes campaign on 1.17 million, no on 1.39 million. We have 26 results in. We have 6 local authority areas to declare, and they include Edinburgh. That is the biggest of the ones that remains. And if we take a look at... Can we take a look at the ones still counting? Do we have the list of the local authority areas still counting, just to remind ourselves? And there we are. Edinburgh, and Fife, that is Gordon Brown's area, and Main Campbell's area. Aberdeenshire, well, that includes the constituency of Alex Salmond, and indeed his former Westminster constituency of Banff and Buchan. That's all in Aberdeenshire. Highland, well, a very dispersed area and lots of logistics there, but they're still counting. Murray, well, that's interesting too, because we're still expecting Murray, which, as Sarah was just telling us earlier, is an area with a big SNP tradition, and Argyll and Bute, which again is an area which is very dispersed, and there are some islands involved too. So those are the ones still counting, and there are good reasons for that. In Edinburgh, for example, just the volume of votes involved. So as soon as we get a declaration from any of those, we'll be there straight away. In the meantime, let's go to Westminster and join Andrew.
Thanks, Hugh. So it's a vote for the Union to survive. Looks like the margin's 55 to 45, which is more than any of the last-minute polls told us, so maybe the yes vote are not the only losers tonight. The pound has soared to almost 165 against the dollar. It's hitting almost 128 against the euro, which is a recent record. The Prime Minister is speaking at 7 o'clock. He will make a statement. He's expected to reiterate his plans for further devolution to the Parliament in Edinburgh. But because of backbench pressure, he's also expected to say something about what that would mean for England and the rest of the United Kingdom. Our constitutional expert, Peter Hennessy, is back. Isabel Hardman from The Spectator is with us too. And you keep your ear close to the Tory backbenches. I'm told that what the position Mr. Cameron, they'll be relieved they've won, but the position Mr. Cameron has put them in, they're very unhappy, and that happiness goes all the way up into the cabinet.
Yes, it does. And they feel that they haven't really been consulted properly, which is always David Cameron's problem, is that he makes decisions without factoring in the will of his party, and then they feel very resentful. And even though he hasn't been seriously damaged by a yes vote, this is a no vote, which is good news for him. It's still bad news for him because his party is still unhappy.
All right, well, we hear that Mr. Cameron has tweeted about Mr. Darling and congratulated him on winning the campaign. What do we think Mr. Cameron's going to say now about the implications of more devolution for Scotland for the rest of the United Kingdom?
He absolutely has to spell out the implications for England. If he doesn't mention that, which I'd be surprised if he didn't, then his backbenchers would go into uproar. He needs to talk about the implications for English regions, for English councils. And one of the questions he probably also needs to answer is how on earth to sell that to the electorate. English voters may well feel left out in this discussion, but they have rejected attempts at devolution in the past. And Number 10 has also been very bad at making the case for local democracy, such as police and crime commissioners, city mayors. They've really failed on those counts, so he's got a big challenge ahead of him.
Yes, would have been simpler, wouldn't it? It'd have been cleaner, at least. And this is going to be very messy.
It would have been the most extraordinary day if it had gone the other way. I hope David Cameron acknowledges, I suspect he will in his words in a few hours' time, just how brittle the Union is. Down here in Westminster and Whitehall in England, we only woke up to the brittleness of the Union very late on, beginning of September, with that first YouGov poll showing the narrowing. But let's think, running through Mr Cameron's mind, it's not a good idea for anybody to speculate about anybody else's consciousness. But just think if it had gone the other way, he'd have had to have flown to Balmoral this morning to explain to the Queen why he'd lost her kingdom. He's very punctilious about his relationships with the Queen. He wouldn't have wanted to do it over the telephone. There would have been a cabinet this afternoon, I suspect, and Parliament would have been recalled perhaps even for tomorrow.
Right, but none of that's going to happen.
No.
What is going to happen?
What is going to happen is a knock-on effect which we can't predict. We've talked earlier, Andrew, about the dangers in rushing constitutional legislation. And also, when you look at that vow that was put together for the Daily Record, those pledges, was one of them which is still tinkling around in my mind, that we will make the Scottish Parliament permanent. Now, the Scotland Act 1998, as you remember, creates it, but we have a tradition in this country of not producing entrenched legislation that successive parliaments can't amend or abandon if they want to. So does that mean we're going to have to change the British Constitution to put in statutory form that pledge to make the Scottish Parliament permanent? There's no question the Scottish Parliament would be anything other than permanent. Nobody's going to repeal the Scotland Act 1998, but it's another intriguing repercussion of that very rushed vow that they all put together.
Is there not a feeling among some Tory backbenchers that Mr Cameron ripped up the British Constitution on the back of a rogue YouGov poll?
I think so. I think they saw that there was a huge amount of panic at the top of the establishment and that there wasn't a great deal of thought. The problem is that Better Together had been asking for more details on what the leaders would promise for months, but they didn't produce them until they were in a blind panic.
Now, I understand that there's also deep unhappiness on Labour backbenches about Mr Miliband's performance, but also about the kind of devolution that Gordon Brown has been talking about.
Yes, so there have been MPs such as John Denham who've also been talking about the English question. And there is a real question for Labour here, which is how would this campaign have gone had Scottish Labour been a stronger force in Scotland?
Because they lost a lot of the Labour areas, and I understand that Joanne Lamont, the Scottish Labour leader, her constituency voted strongly yes for independence.
And I was talking to a Labour strategist earlier who said, well, you know, this is a big win for no, but let's not ignore the horror of the working class vote who seem to have deserted us.
I mean, is Westminster going to try and agree a position among itself and then go and negotiate with the Scottish Government about further devolution, or is it going to say, this is what we've agreed and this is what we're going to do?
The short answer, you've no idea, but it will not be a good idea if it is done that way without consulting Wales and Northern Ireland and more widely. It's Kipling's line on the Boer War, it's no end of a lesson. And the danger is that this great sigh of relief, which is almost audible across the Thames as we sit here...
Indeed it is.
...will soothe people. They'll start singing lullabies to themselves that it was all right on the night, we shouldn't have got so jumpy, the press got carried away, and they will be wrong.
All right. Well, Prime Minister making a statement at 7 a.m. here in London. Back to Hugh in Glasgow.
Andrew, thank you very much, and thanks to your guests too. Well, you can't miss the screen, can you really? 1.176 for the yes campaign, 1.397 for the no campaign, and that is the basis on which we're forecasting a no result. And, of course, that's the basis on which now politicians, including Nicola Sturgeon, are admitting that they are personally very disappointed at what they acknowledge as a defeat. And we've now had news that the Prime Minister has called Alistair Darling. David Cameron has called him, and Alistair Darling, who led the Better Together campaign, and he said he's congratulated him on a well-fought campaign. That's the statement from David Cameron, which we received just a couple of minutes ago. I've congratulated Alistair Darling, the chairman of Better Together, on a well-fought campaign. And we're expecting Mr Cameron to make a statement at Westminster in Downing Street probably at 7 a.m. So not long to go, just over an hour before that. And it'll be interesting to see what he says, about plans to respond in a meaningful way and a convincing way and a credible way to this result. Because although it is a relief for Mr Cameron and the other pro-union parties, of course it is, they also will have to acknowledge the strength of the vote for breaking away from the rest of the United Kingdom. So that is something to acknowledge. Let's go to Cardiff, because we have Peter Hain there, the former Labour Cabinet Minister, former Secretary of State for Wales. Peter, good morning to you.
Morning, Hugh, from Wales.
Absolutely. And given your role back in '97, Peter, with delivering devolution, those are early days of the process, let's have your thoughts on today's vote in Scotland.
For me, the vote in Scotland was a revolt against the Westminster elite, both yes voters and no voters. And what now needs to happen as a matter of urgency is that the Prime Minister and all the party leaders have got to seize this opportunity. The natural inclination of the Westminster establishment is to be minimalist and incremental. The decision has got to be maximalist and radical, because there's such a strong feeling throughout the country, not just in Scotland, but in Wales and in England as well, against the way that politics has been done. And I think Scotland has spoken for the whole of the United Kingdom in saying we want change, and we want change that's got to sweep right through the United Kingdom, and that must include England. Yes, more powers for Scotland have been promised. Wales will need more powers and deserve more powers as well, and probably Northern Ireland too. But the big unanswered question for British politics has been the English question, and the need for people in England, whether they're in Cornwall or the northeast of England or Manchester City region, to say, we want more say too. We don't want to be ruled by the London elite any more than Scotland, people in Scotland did.
Peter, bear with us, because Alex Salmond has also been on social media just giving his response. And Mr Salmond, the First Minister, saying, well done to Glasgow, our Commonwealth city. Glasgow, of course, voted yes in this referendum, and to the people of Scotland for such incredible support, he said. That statement in the past few minutes, and we're expecting Mr Salmond to be speaking later on in Edinburgh, and Nicola Sturgeon seemed to suggest that she wanted a very radical response to this, Peter, and that's exactly what you've been saying too. And I'm just wondering, when it comes to parties at Westminster working together on a response, and Mr Cameron's going to have to signal this in a short while, what will make that pledge from Mr Cameron, for you, a credible one, and one that can deliver proper change in a pretty rapid space of time?
If he's absolutely clear that not only is Scotland going to get the powers, the extra powers that were promised by all three party leaders the other week, but that Wales will as well, and that England will too, not just rearranging the way Westminster might do its business in terms of our Parliament, but actually saying to the people of England, you're entitled to more say as well. London shouldn't run things and dominate you, and there shouldn't be this old, centralised, anachronistic way of doing things. And I think he's got to be radical, because that's what the mood is. And it should include as well dealing with the House of Lords. There are conservative forces in all parties, frankly, who don't like change. And this has got to be a moment for change, and that should be to reconstitute the second chamber, to reflect all the parts of the United Kingdom directly elected at the same time as a general election. So we have a democratic second chamber as well. Yes, perhaps keep an appointed a bit of that in order to manage the change, but fundamentally a democratic second chamber complementing radical decentralisation of power throughout the United Kingdom. Only this, I think, can restore politics to some kind of legitimacy, because we've discredited ourselves increasingly over recent years, and people are fed up with us.
Just a last point, Peter. Gordon Brown talks about home rule, using that rather old-fashioned term now. But if you accept that this is part of, if you like, a kind of federal solution to the imbalance that we have at the moment, does that, just to spell it out for us and to spell it out for viewers, does that involve having an English Parliament, as well as a proper Welsh Parliament and a Scottish Parliament and an equally powerful body in Northern Ireland?
There should be a federal Westminster Parliament, alongside which Scottish Parliament, legislatures in Wales and Northern Ireland, and legislatures in the regions of England too. And within that context of a federal Westminster Parliament, London already has, within England, substantial control. So I don't think there should be an English Parliament, but what there should be is real devolved power to the communities and regions and city regions of England, from Cornwall to the northeast, from Manchester City region to London as it already exists. That's got to be the way forward. And maybe we need to look at English MPs being solely responsible for scrutinising English-only laws at Westminster. But you've got to avoid balkanising Parliament and having first and second-class MPs. We've got to go for a federal solution, not an English Parliament, which, after all, over 4 out of 5 MPs are from English constituencies. England dominates our existing parliament. And there's one other final point I'd make about this. You don't want a situation where actually the Prime Minister has to be elected by English MPs alone because he or she has to command a majority amongst English MPs in Parliament. It's got to be a Prime Minister elected who reflects the whole of the UK, or otherwise you will see an accelerating momentum for independence and breakaways across the United Kingdom. So this is a real moment of change and we've got to grasp it.
Peter, very good of you to join us at 10 to 6 in the morning. Thank you very much. Peter Hain there, the former Labour Cabinet Minister, giving us his views, and as someone who's worked in some detail on policy to devolve power over the past 20 years. If you've just joined us here on this BBC election special, referendum special, we're broadcasting from the headquarters of BBC Scotland in Glasgow, and the Scottish referendum on independence has taken place. There are 26 results in, there are 6 results to go, but the BBC has already forecast that the result will be a no, a rejection of independence. But we're on air because we've got some very important results yet to come from Edinburgh and from Fife and Aberdeenshire. I'll be introducing my new guest in just a moment, but before that, Jeremy Vine with some thoughts on what happens now that we know it is likely to be a no.
Well, Hugh, just listening to you and Peter Hain there, it underlines the fact that if you'll forgive the triple negative, a no vote tonight doesn't mean no change. There are already actually changes coming down the track for Scotland from the 2012 Scotland Act. Let's have a look at some of them. So there will be a power to vary the Scottish rate of income tax for a start. Also, to take the proceeds of stamp duty levied in Scotland. This is already coming down the line. Land tax and landfill tax, more powers there for the Scottish Parliament. Also powers over drink driving and speeding limits. And then one of the ones that the Nationalists say, well, this proves it's small beer, they're going to be given more powers over controlling air guns. But during the campaign we heard more, didn't we? And now we're trying to find out what the more actually means. The party leaders making this big promise that they were going to share resources equitably, and saying as well that the Scottish Government would have the final say on NHS funding. A lot of people said, well, it does already. But they did promise that talks would start immediately after the referendum, with new proposals for further devolution by the end of October. And then by the end of November, a white paper. And then on January the 15th, a new law published. And the question now is what will be in that new law published in January 2015, January the 15th rather. Control of a greater amount of tax take, that's one possibility. Also, income tax, more powers to vary it. Housing benefit as well, the chance to set different levels of housing benefit. Power over VAT, to change the level of VAT, is another possible one. And air passenger transport duty, which would give the Scottish Government power over the price of a plane seat, that as well. Plus quite a big one, the power to change inheritance tax and capital gains tax levels, and also maybe even to look at new levels of benefits. Plus, as was discussed with Peter Hennessy and Andrew Neil, the Scottish Parliament constitutionally guaranteed, and the big Lib Dem thought that maybe at the end of all of this, you have a federal UK. So an enormous amount of change coming, and possibly even more when that white paper is published in 2015.
Jeremy, thank you very much. We've got some more figures to share with you because while Jeremy was speaking, we had some more declarations. I got Aberdeenshire. Now, this is an interesting result again because just to underline, this is the